Ever since I was a young boy, I would wake up in the morning with my furniture arranged differently than when I went to sleep. Sometimes it was small, like my lamp in the wrong place or my shoe rack was tipped over. Other days, I'd wake up and the bed would be in the wrong spot, the dresser on the wrong wall, my desk in front of the door. In the beginning, it wasn't in a messy fashion. It seemed like a perfectly normal way to arrange my bedroom, just in a different way than I preferred. I have a very early memory, from around 5 years old, of my mom yelling at me for moving around all my furniture at night. I swore up and down that it wasn't me, and she seemed conflicted when she was yelling at me. I wasn't a troublemaker. She knew it wasn't something I would do. But looking back now, I think she was just scared of the thought of it not being me. After a couple of hours, I convinced my mom it wasn't me. After all, I was a small kid. I don't think I could have physically moved it on my own. Next to blame was my older brother. He was 11 at the time, so it still would have been hard for him to move my stuff, but not impossible. My brother likes to mess with me. No more than any normal brother, but never any over-the-top pranks. Mostly just because he was lazy, though. No way he'd lose sleep over something so weird like moving my furniture every night. After my brother denied it, and adding on that he stayed at his friend's house for sleepovers often, gave him an alibi. My mom attempted to blame my dad next, but of course that comment was not taken lightly, and ended with my parents just pointing fingers at each other. My mom spent that night in bed with me. She tried her best to explain why she was sleeping in my bed without making it sound scary, but I could tell she was scared. I wasn't scared at all because it felt normal. I see now as an adult why she was freaked out. The night felt normal. If anything, it was a fun night, like a big sleepover. My first sleepover, even. We woke up the next morning and my mom gasped and gripped the sheets. Wait, how did this happen? I was right here. My mom looked around the room. It was pretty easy to do so, given that the bed was right in the center of the room. This hadn't happened before. It was always in a normal spot against the wall. It was like the room was showing off that it could put the bed in the middle of the room without waking us up. My mother always claimed to be a notoriously light sleeper. She said how she can't fully turn her brain off in case we need her in the night, but she always seemed to sleep deeply to me. The rest of the day, she kept insisting that someone was sleepwalking or something. She didn't think anyone was playing a prank, but she knew someone in the house was doing it. She had to believe it. My parents ordered a security camera online to put in my room so they would watch the footage the next morning. They got next day delivery, so I'd have to go one more night without them being able to watch me sleep. That night, they decided to let me sleep in their bed. I was even more excited than the night before. Now this was really a sleepover. That night, my mom tucked me in tightly, in between her and my dad. I remember she held me all night long. I woke up the next morning to my mom sounding terrified. My parents' bed wasn't even in the bedroom anymore. It was sitting in the living room right outside my parents' bedroom. My dad sat up and started to get as concerned as my mom. How did our bed get out here? He whispered with a stutter. It can't even fit through the door frame. Was it taken apart and put back together out here? He hopped out of bed and picked me up into his arms in the process. And we all stared at it, confused. Even as a young boy, I knew something was really wrong. My dad started to take the bed apart to bring it back into their bedroom and noticed that the screws were loose. Some were even missing, like it was put back together in a rush. I remember my parents being on the phone with, I think, the police, but they never showed up. I remember my mom being upset on the phone when they wouldn't help us at all. That night, my dad installed a camera into the corner of my bedroom. My mom once again slept next to me. The camera they got was basically like a baby monitor that recorded the night. My dad had the monitor beside his bed to be extra set of eyes. The night came and went. My mom and I woke up with my room yet again rearranged. She looked up at the camera to see that it was destroyed. All the video from the night was destroyed as well. This was right around the time when baby monitors could record to an iPhone and you could watch the video the next morning. But everything about the video was corrupted. My family went to the police station that night, insisting that someone was in our house. The cops wrote down a statement, but that's all that came of it. My parents, for the next couple of years, kept trying to figure out what was going on, trying different solutions to find out how this was happening, only to find dead ends over and over again. My mom started to believe the house was haunted, and after a couple of years, my dad believed her. This was the main reason for our move when I was 8. I was so excited to be done with whatever was going on. At this point, the sleepovers weren't cute. I wanted my own space. My parents didn't let me go to summer camp or stay at friends' houses like my brother did. I was sick of it. It was night 1 in the new place. It was only about 30 minutes from our old house. Not too big of a change, but just enough that I was excited. My parents felt so good about the new place that they let me sleep in my own bed. I remember they told me at dinner while we ate McDonald's over a makeshift table made of cardboard boxes. I jumped up and down and hugged them both. That night I tucked in and my mom was hesitant to leave me in my own bed. She seemed worried but knew I needed this. My room didn't have much in it, just my bed, dresser, and a few boxes with my clothes in them. I remember falling asleep that night and thinking how creaky the new house was. But I didn't mind. I was hopeful. I woke up the next morning before my mom and dad. I didn't have curtains yet, so the sunrise woke me. I sat up and stretched. I rubbed my eyes to wake myself up, and I immediately felt a knot in my throat. The furniture was moved. At that moment, I made a decision. I knew if my mom saw this, I'd be stuck sleeping next to her for my whole life. My little imagination took over, and I thought about coming home from my job one day as a grown man wearing a suit, and my mom still tucking me into bed. I sprung up and quickly moved everything back to where it came from. Luckily, nothing was too heavy for me to move. Just as I got everything back into place, I heard my mom's footsteps. I jumped into bed and pretended to be sleeping. She cracked the door and let out a sigh of relief and shut the door. How I wish I could go back in time and tell my mom the truth. I spent the next month doing this same routine. My mom always woke up at 7:30 to check on me, so I'd always get up at 7 and fix everything. It was exhausting, but worth it. My mom was warming up to the idea of me going to summer camp, so I was motivated. My mom got comfortable enough to send me to camp. It was only a one-night camp that year, which was fine. She needed to take baby steps. I didn't think anything would happen, honestly. But when we woke up in the morning, every single bunk bed was outside. All 20 of them. 30 kids and 10 adults. All waking up feeling confused and disoriented. Some bunk beds, even on their sides, tipped over. Of course, the camp counselors were confused. I knew what I had to do. I gaslit all the adults into believing it was the plan of the troubled kid, Eddie. I made up a whole story about how he convinced a few other kids to do it in the night. I didn't think it was believable, but I was so convincing that everyone believed me. The camp counselors wanted to inform all the parents when they came to pick up what had happened. Of Of course, it was a violation and needed to be explained to all the parents what happened. Luckily, I got out of it. I went to camp with a school friend and his mom picked us up. And his mom believed me when I said I'd tell my mom myself. As the years passed, I realized no matter where I slept, this would happen to me. I turned it into a sleepover trick. I'll tell my friends to come over, and sure enough, it would happen. I'd even sleep at their houses, and it would happen. Whenever I was trying to show off the trick, the room would be in even worse condition than a normal night. I felt like I had a superpower. The years went by, and it just became my life. It was like brushing my teeth in the morning. Now and then I'd forget to fix everything, and in the morning my mom would check on me. It only happened a few times, but each time I saw fear in her eyes. I always just said I moved stuff around the night before because I was bored of the layout. But I could only use that lie so many times, though. One time in high school, I was very sick. I was having a hard time getting up in the morning to move my furniture, and I didn't move my furniture for a couple of mornings. My mom was getting nervous, and I knew I had to get up before her to move it the next day. My mom came into my bedroom to say goodnight, and to let me know she'd be gone in the early morning, but would say hi as soon as she got home around noon. This was music to my ears. I could sleep in and not worry about moving everything before she could barge in. The morning came and I got to sleep in until about 11. I couldn't believe how much better I was feeling. I knew I should have probably started to move my furniture, to be proactive, but of course, that's not what I did. I could hear my brother in his room next door playing video games, so I went to go see what he was playing. Him being a brother, he wasn't letting me play with him, so I instead stood by his bed for way too long and annoyed him. I lost track of time and heard the garage door open. My heart sank. I ran back into my room and tried to move everything back into its place. Luckily, throughout the years, I convinced my parents to get me lighter furniture. They never caught on, and it made my life so much easier. Everything got replaced except for my dresser, which was a family heirloom. It wasn't all that big, but this day it felt heavy. I knew I was weak from being sick all week, but I couldn't believe how heavy it was. It was the last thing to move, but it just wouldn't budge. I frantically ran to my brother and told him I needed help moving my dresser. He leapt out of bed to run to my room. With most things, he doesn't care to help me, but I was always honest with my brother that the furniture thing never stopped. He knew that if our mom knew, our whole house would be a living nightmare, and she would even make us move again. He always had my back when it came to my supernatural furniture. Instead of going back into my room, I went downstairs to distract my mom. I knew she'd be mad to see me out of bed, but the consequences of my furniture being out of place would be so much worse. My socks slid across the hardwood floor, and I reached the kitchen just as she was opening the door. Her happy humming was immediately interrupted when she made eye contact with me. She set a grocery bag on the counter and got out some soup she had just bought at the store. I thought she was going to yell at me, but I wasn't going to question it. I figured she was just being patient with me since I was sick. Just as she got out a box of popsicles, I heard an awful sound, one that I'll never forget, a sound that is completely my fault. I heard my brother scream. It was a loud scream, but short, like something interrupted it. It sounded like he stubbed his toe and then covered his mouth halfway through. My mom and I made eye contact and started to head upstairs to check on him. It was too loud to be something small. We turned the corner into my room and I didn't know what to feel. I saw my dresser was still not in its normal spot, but just slightly moved from where I left it. The dresser had a big drawer on the front that opened up like a door or a cabinet, and it was wide open and empty. But most importantly, my brother was gone. An hour went by, and my brother was nowhere to be found. The doors to the house seemed to all be locked, same with the windows. We ended up filing a missing persons report. A whole week went by and there was no sign of him. My mom thought my brother was in the middle of moving my furniture to prank me or something and got spooked and ran off. I didn't have the heart to tell her or anyone that I felt like this was my fault. I thought that maybe whatever was moving my stuff wanted just me to move it or something. After that awful week, we found something to make it so much worse. My dad was in my room with me and trying to ask more questions about our last interaction. A lot of people ask me this since I was the last person to see my brother. As I explained it to him for the 100th time, he was randomly looking at the dresser and opened up the big door we originally found wide open. It had a note taped to the inside. Before my dad took it, he looked at me nervously, asking if it was mine, but he very well already knew the answer. We called my mom into the room before we read it. The following is an exact quote from the note. "I see our little game of hide and seek did not end like I imagined. Your brother is not who I intended to find me, but he will have to do, for now." We had no clue what the note meant, but that didn't stop it from sending shivers down my spine. At the very least, now we knew someone had taken my brother. We thought the cops would do more to help now that we had a note. And while they did do a little more to help us find him, they never found anything else. And I never saw my brother again. Last year, I moved out of my parents' house. This decision was completely based on my not wanting to move my furniture around every morning. I couldn't imagine a world where I could leave my furniture just is and sleep in without the worry of my mom seeing it. That being said, I moved out as soon as I could afford it. I moved in with my best friend and we shared an apartment. He knew about my little party trick and was never too freaked out by it. Although part of me was scared that once he saw it was legit, he would be scared. The first morning I woke up and the room was a mess. Everything was in the wrong place, just as usual. Although I didn't think there would even be a usual for how my room looked anymore. I was sick of fixing it. It was going to look however it wanted to look. After a couple of days of just letting my furniture do whatever, I noticed how it was being arranged was more and more chaotic, messier, like the furniture was mad that I wasn't putting it all back. I started straightening things, but nothing too wild. I'd just leave the big stuff. I mean, my roommate was weirded out, but he didn't care at first. One morning, about 2 weeks into living at the new place, I woke up with my bed on our deck outside. I knew it was going to start getting out of hand. The whole reason for me moving out was not to have to move my furniture around like crazy. I was so mad I couldn't just leave the furniture it was. For some reason, it had to be put back in its normal spot. I let it go one more morning. I wanted to see what would happen if I left it just once more. I woke up the next day in the middle of the woods, with no clue where I was. It felt like when I was a kid and this happened with bunk beds, but it was so much worse. It was relatively easy to find my way back, but just a long walk. In all, it took me about 2 hours to get home. Not to mention having to figure out how to get my bed back home. When I got back, my roommate had a chat with me. He said how he never really thought the weird furniture thing was real and thought that it was a very elaborate joke. And now that he lived with me, it was affecting his mental health. He felt paranoid and really tired and wanted me to move out. I was, of course, bummed, but knew it was for the best. I tried to tell him I'd start moving the furniture back every morning and that it would all be okay, but that didn't seem to help him feel better. I called my parents to tell them I was coming back home. They seemed excited to have me come home. They seemed very cheerful, actually. When I asked them what was making them so happy, they said they felt better than they had in years and felt so well rested. It was nice to hear them happy for what felt like the first time since my brother went missing. I had most of my stuff packed up and was ready to move in just a couple of days. We both knew this whole moving thing might cause problems with our friendship, so we wanted to do something fun before I moved out. We did a spontaneous week-long road trip. The morning I left, I didn't move any of the furniture back. It didn't seem necessary. I noticed something strange about the road trip. At no point in the trip did my furniture move. It was the first time since I can remember I woke up with everything looking the same. I thought maybe I found some kind of weird hack. We got back from an amazing trip feeling closer than ever, feeling thankful that we did it. I walked into my room and saw everything just as I remembered leaving it the day we left on our trip. Everything except for my dresser, with the front facing down right in the middle of the room. I went over to the front of it to try to lift it into its place, but it felt heavy. I immediately felt the memories of the day my brother went missing flashing back into my head. This thing being heavy is bad news. I wasn't sure why, but I knew I didn't like it. I called my roommate in to help me move it, and at first, he was hesitant. He didn't want anything to do with my furniture. And finally, I convinced him to just help me lift it, quickly. As we pushed it back up to the wall, the body of a man came falling out. He was dead and limp, claw marks filling the inside of my dresser. It looked like it fell over while he was hiding in it. He most likely fell over at the beginning of our trip and couldn't get out. He was in the same spot where I found that ominous note a little while back. He also had a gas tank that had a sleeping aid in it. It was connected to one of those things that go over your mouth and nose before surgery or something. He looked malnourished and sickly. This man was my ghost for the last 15 years, moving my furniture around, thinking it was some kind of fun game or something. This was the man who took my brother. This was the man who gave a sleeping aid to me and everyone else I lived with, so he could move my furniture around for me. This was the man who took away countless sleepovers from my childhood. This was the man who stole my mother's peace of mind my whole childhood, so I could have some sick game every morning. They never found out who he was. They couldn't find anyone that matched his fingerprints or dental records or anything at all. It's like it never even existed. And most of all, they never found my brother. They never found out how the man got in and out of my house, if he even left, or how he was always around no matter where I slept. They never figured out how he managed to sneak around my living space for so long and not be seen. That was last year, and after that day, my furniture never moved again.